It's a problem that has plagued humanity since the dawn of reason itself, when philosophers of old would cast solemn gazes towards the heavens and beg an answer to the most unanswerable of all questions. Who's better, Marvel or DC? The truth is that it's ultimately just a matter of what you're into. If you like one or the other or both, that's fine. The nice thing about liking things is you don't have to choose. Aligning yourself too closely with your interests will only ever lead to eventual disappointment or embarrassment when something like this or this happens. But still, people insist on deciding. So how do you put an end to this argument? Where people's faith, people's zeal means they follow the myth of some supposed Snyder cut around like some false prophet, only to die in the desert and have their bones picked clean by carrion beetles. Simple. We turn to the oldest impartial mediator, lazy, subjective mathematics. Look, there's no way to do this right, but I'm gonna do it the best way I can. Across 4 categories, I plan to mathematically quantify once and for all who is better, Marvel or DC. I haven't had to do math in like 20 years. This was hard, clap for me. Most of it's just basic addition, but still, I'm an idiot, so. We're gonna do this like tennis, folks. It's the easiest scoring rules for any sport, we all know it. Marvel and DC have franchises that have permeated virtually every form of culture, from rain jackets and bike helmets and baby socks and bed sheets and knives. But instead I'll be tallying available information about movies, comic books, video games, and basically any other form of available information. And we are going to award points based on who wins individual categories. Who wins more categories is obviously the better comics publisher. Category 1, total numbers. Is bigger always better? I'm 6'7" and I hit my head very hard on low-hanging building fixtures at least once a day. It will eventually kill me, so I say no. However, finding the bigger of 2 numbers is a surefire way to get perspective. Given that Marvel and DC are both comics publishers, the most natural place for us to start would be looking at their comics output. It's virtually impossible to dig back and count the total number of comics ever printed, so let's just look at titles. As of writing, DC Comics' lifetime output of total titles they've ever published across all their imprints, books like Vertigo included, is a whopping 5,631 different series. Not issues, mind you, series. And full disclosure, this does factor in some trade paperbacks as they were too hard to isolate from our searches, but nonetheless, it's an astounding number. What's more astounding is that Marvel, despite starting 4 years after DC Comics as Timely Comics in 1939, has published 300 more series. Of course, the total number of series published doesn't mean much if people aren't reading your comics. If you look at the 9 highest-selling American comic book characters by single-issue floppy, DC only has 2 characters, Superman and Batman, to Marvel's 7. However, Superman's 600 million issues sold and Batman's 474 million issues sold place them far and away in the number 1 and 2 spots on that very same list. So while the Avengers may have assembled in the top 9, DC's still got that top spot. You still think Superman's boring, unbeatable, always valiantly at the forefront, predictably number 1? Yeah, well, fair. Okay. Let's forget about single-issue comics. How many people read comics that way anyway? People like collecting trades, right? I mean, kind of. It seems like they really actually just like collecting One Piece, the highest-selling comic by volume of all time with 458 million sales. And that's only since 1997, a whole 6 decades after Marvel and DC came on the scene. So which of our big 2 place beneath that? Neither, actually. The only American comics in the top 10 is Peanuts. Charlie Brown might not be able to kick that football, but it turns out he could kick the living shit out of Marvel and DC at the same time. No one is in that top 10. Specific characters. I think that we can all agree, for sake of this entirely scientific argument, that Spider-Man is Marvel's flagship character, and on DC's sides, by nearly all metrics, Superman still outpaces Batman. While the Bat boom in Bat popularity of the last 3 decades should be duly Bat noted, it actually does a disservice to DC to track Bats as their most popular character. So between Superman and Spider-Man, who moves more comics? Well, since Action Comics #1, Superman has sold approximately 600 million issues, as we previously noted. The Webhead, on the other hand, has sold a much more modest 380 million since his debut in Amazing Fantasy #15. Even if you proportionally adjust the timescale of Spider-Man's sales to account for Superman's 24-year lead time, the Boy in Blue still outpaces Spider-Man by about 50 million comics. It's time to get real. This day and age, movies are the real money mainline for these publishers, and this is also where we start to see some pretty stark differences. Starting with Batman 1966 in, well, 1966, all the way to the present and into the future in 2022, DC has only put into production 42 theatrical films. This doesn't include old Superman serials, but it does include superhero movies from Steel to Constantine, all the way to adaptations of DC imprints such as Red, V for Vendetta, and Road to Perdition. Even with Shaq and Tom Hanks on their side, the classic duo, DC still doesn't even come close to taking down Marvel. They've got their fingers in over 70 theatrical films, from 1986 bizarre Lucasfilm adaptation of Howard the Duck, all the way to the modern MCU. Even if you strip out Marvel imprint adaptations such as Men in Black, Kick-Ass, or the Kingsman movies, Marvel is still far and away the victor. Are they all gold? No. Oh my god, no. Holy shit, no. But there are way more. Did you see that? It's kind of fucked up. Many might argue that live action films is an unfair comparison, since it's not always the best representation of the comic characters to put them in a live action. So why don't we take a broad look into animation? Marvel's put out 2 theatrically released animated movies with Spider-Verse and Big Hero 6, but this doesn't quite beat DC's 3. It's also worth noting that on a direct-to-video level, Marvel doesn't even hold a distant candle to DC's animation machine. Gotta give this one to DC, because you know, they really know how to take their most popular comics and then just have Kevin Conroy read them aloud.
I am Batman!
But when it comes to animated TV shows, Marvel once again has the edge, and not just because of their superior selection of killer 1990s theme songs. If, alongside all their other shows, you count Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, which is, yes, real, and yes, did have 13 episodes in the 1970s, then Marvel beats DC narrowly with 45 animated shows to 44. However, when it comes to live action shows, DC's got it on lock with 38 to 24. Marvel maybe should have been a little less concerned about how all of your shows interconnect. You know, Krypton, sure. Gotham, it's over here too. Why not? Arrow, yeah. Then the farting donkey from Doom Patrol. Whatever, sure. Marvel's got the animation, DC's got live action. Things get really interesting when you look at video games. DC has dominated this past decade with the Arkham games, setting the standard for what a licensed superhero game could and should be. And they also have a whopping 72 total licensed video games, going all the way back to Superman on the Atari 2600. Marvel, however, never ceases to astound and has 133 total video games, from the LEGO games to the Capcom crossovers, going all the way back to, well, you guessed it, Spider-Man on the Atari 2600, produced by Parker Brothers, funny enough. Even when you count games by series, Marvel still has the edge, with DC's 6 Arkham games versus the 7 entries in the Marvel vs. Capcom crossover series. We'll talk about sales later on though. Just for fun and to keep things interesting, let's cover the final tentpole of entertainment, the thing that you've all been waiting for. Branded roller coasters. Yes, thanks to DC's long-standing deal with Six Flags, resultant of the previous shared ownership by Time Warner, DC has a total of 35 theme park attractions, 24 of which are roller coasters. Sure, in any number of cases, those coasters may have been rides that existed before, but were just painted purple and then named Bizarro, but they've got quantity, baby. Marvel, on the other hand, has a pitiful showing of 8 attractions with only 1 coaster among them. Sure, eventually Disney will drop more Marvel theme park madness on us than we know what to do with, but for the time being, we've got that Guardians of the Galaxy ride, which is fine, I guess. It took over the Twilight Zone ride, but I'm not bitter. It's fine. And then they've got Marvel Superhero Island in Florida, the product of Marvel desperately selling off rights in the 1990s to stay afloat, which has resulted in a whole theme park where people dress as Marvel characters and drive ATVs around. That's all they seem to do. This is real. No one has made them stop doing this. You can go there and see it happen. Category 2, where cash reigns supreme. Which comic book is the single best-selling comic of all time? Besides One Piece, obviously. I mean, DC and Marvel. We all know it's One Piece, okay? Well, we basically can only look at the so-called modern era, since it's too hard to track things back in the day. But as you're probably already aware, the best-selling comic of all time is X-Men #1 from 1991, the Jim Lee, Chris Claremont relaunch that famously moved 7.1 million copies. And here's the other thing that they're famous for: only actually tracking copies shipped and not actually just the copies sold. By amping the demand for this, Marvel infamously put way more issues in the hands of stores than they could realistically sell, even bankrupting some mom and pop shops who were unable to move their merch and leaving copies in quarter bins and comic book stores for decades to come, like some rash that you just can't get rid of, and also it's a Jim Lee rash. But even if we're going to ding this comic for inflated sales, things are still in Marvel's favor. The #2 spot is claimed by 1992's X-Force, selling 5 million copies at the height of Rob Liefeld's pouch-loving, foot-hating fame. We don't get a DC comic in the top spot until Adventures of Superman #500 with the Return of Superman, which has sold 4.2 million copies. That's right, DC, you didn't have to kill and bring back the Man of Steel to move comics. You could have just put like a fuckload of pouches on him. If you just put pouches on him, you'd be making bank. Moving to more modern history, it's time to move from long boxes to the box office. Movies. Who has the higher worldwide box office gross? Well, if you don't know this already, my condolences for whatever is happening to your head. Avengers Endgame is far and away the #1 superhero movie of all time, and is in fact the #1 highest grossing movie of all time. With over $2.7 billion, it is more than double the gross of DC's Aquaman. But props to Aquaman, because that's still a really big box office pull for a movie that looks like it was designed to be watched on an airplane. Good going. No matter how you count it, Marvel's on top. Even DC's hugely successful Dark Knight series is still about $300 million short of breaking Endgame's record alone. When it comes to video games, things are a different story. But only in that we're talking about video games now, not the part about how Marvel is on top, because that's still very, very true. The most successful entry in the Batman Arkham series, Arkham City, was just recently surpassed by Spider-Man PS4, hitting 9 million copies sold. This is especially impressive when you consider that Arkham City was available on 7 platforms, versus Spider-Man PS4 being available on only one of the consoles. I can't remember which. Okay, but what about the ultimate test, the test of time? Surely the best way to show value is by tracking the appreciation of value over time. So the easiest test: what is the most valuable comic book of each publisher? DC's got the easy go-to. Action Comics #1 will always be the most expensive comic book of all time. In 2014, a 9.0 CGC graded copy sold for $3,207,852. Marvel's Amazing Fantasy #15 top dollar bottoms out at $1.1 million for a 9.6 rated copy. $1 million? What is this, some kind of poor person's comic? A comic for... so expensive. And I want one. I want it! Category #3, critical reception. Let's get real. Obviously, money doesn't actually mean everything. What it comes down to is just how many people actually enjoy it, which is making it all the more perverse that we're comparing two things that are really just there to be enjoyed. Also perverse is that we both know exactly what direction this section is going to go, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it anyway. Because look, I'm trying to actually be fair here. I'm gonna skip comic book reviews since there's actually no good way to quantify these, but we're gonna have to focus on the screen. Going to Metacritic, Marvel wins a surprisingly narrow victory over DC by comparing both the highest and lowest scoring movies. Black Panther's 88% narrowly ekes out over Superman 2's 87%. On the flip side, Marvel's Howard the Duck, horrible duck boobs included and all, pulls in at 28%, with Superman 4: The Quest for Peace thudding in at 24%. So Metacritic is great for checking in our highs and lows, but we really need to consider the total volume as well. The most fair way I can think of doing this is by comparing the total number of rotten versus fresh scores on Rotten Tomatoes. It's admittedly a completely arbitrary breaking point, but it's going to be as fair as any since the standard is consistent. Of the 23 MCU movies, there are actually 0 rotten movies. Yes, even Iron Man 2 is somehow fresh, even with this happening. The highest rated, as you might expect, is Black Panther at 97% fresh. The lowest rated is Thor: The Dark World, which has a pretty generous 66%. And if we go broad to all Marvel movies outside the MCU, our man Howard the Duck is bringing up the rear again at 15%. DC isn't able to compete here in any of these fields. Out of the 7 DCEU films, 4 are rotten, and that's more than half. Wonder Woman has a formidable 93%, and Shazam is not far behind with 91%. Unfortunately, you then have Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman neck and neck with 27% and 28% respectively. Going outside the DCEU doesn't do the brand any favors. The lowest rated is 1984's Supergirl with 10%, which is in close company with Superman 4 at 11% and Steel and Jonah Hex at 12%. Gotta give this one to Marvel again, I'm sorry. But the critics aren't everything. What about the audience? Well, the audience score again favors Marvel, with Spider-Man Far From Home having 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, 2 solid points above both The Dark Knight and Batman Begins at 94%. Far From Home was released after a modification to how these calculations are made, however, so I'm willing to let this category be a bust. Speaking of categories that are a bust, let's talk about awards. Sticking to the big guns, the Oscars, Marvel and DC have each clocked in 6 wins. Yes, even Suicide Squad won that award for hair and makeup. And while Into the Spider-Verse may have won in an arguably more total category of Best Animated Feature, in fairness, I have to let all these cancel out. DC's gotta have something in this category, right? Oh. Here, believe it or not, review scores are definitely in DC's favor in the video game category. The highest rated DC game of all time is Batman Arkham City with 96 on Metacritic, 8 points higher than Spider-Man, and still 6 points higher than the top rated Marvel game, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the Dreamcast. Too little too late? Yes, kind of. It's Marvel's got this one. Category 4, the X Factor. Perhaps this is an unfair comparison, and by perhaps I mean it is, and I already said that it is, so you can't fault me for it. I'm absolved of all guilt. But if we're gonna try to be fair, then we have to look beyond just the obvious. So I wanna check in on a few categories to see how these characters have permeated the public consciousness. Google search results. Searching for mentions of Marvel characters will find you a handful of pages, about 88.1 million results as a matter of fact. DC Comics, on the other hand, will bring you back 562 million results. Why? I don't really know. It's just a better phrase to write, DC Comics. That's worth something. A Google search for Superman, however, will get you 323 million results, less than a third of what you get when searching for Spider-Man, probably because of all these recent Spider-Man movies. Superman, he died and then quit. Or was fired, so. What about songs? Well, the AV Club was able to find 26 songs about Superman, from Barbra Streisand to a favorite of mine, experimental art pop artist Laurie Anderson, to Eminem, to T-Pain, and Taylor Swift. On the other hand, Marvel Comics are referenced nonstop by the Wu-Tang Clan. One of my other favorites, Ghostface Killah, has a song about Iron Man. MF Doom has made a whole career out of, wearing a Dr. Doom mask, so I don't know. I'm gonna say this one balances out as well. Last but not least, the truest of all fandom showdowns, the number of fanfiction stories on fanfiction.net. It's not even close, folks. People have submitted over 13,000 stories about wanting to kiss Batman. So there you have it. This completely scientific, fully objective study has concluded that by any shadow of a doubt that Marvel and DC are fundamentally equal. Each have their own merits, so I must remind you again, there's no reason to pick one above the other. That said, while I still have you here, there's just one important thing that I must note. Marvel's better. Obviously Marvel's better. What, like Batman fan fiction stories are gonna tip the scales? Roller coasters? Get real. Unbelievable. Ah. No, really, you can like whichever one you want. It's fine. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed that episode, the best way by far to support Dorkly is to sign up for Dropout. Every month for less than the price of, I don't know, like a comic book and a half, you get Dorkly shows a week early, you get exclusive access to the Dropout Discord where you can talk to us about your favorite comic book and a half, you get exclusive shows like Dimension 20 and Troopers, which are both so funny and so good. So head over to dropout.tv, sign up for the free trial, get on that Discord, and I'll tell you how that comic book ends. ends with a cliffhanger. That's a spoiler.